Kicked out at 16. Orphan, dusty post office. What he found inside changed everything. If you've ever felt like the world has already decided who you are, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to fight for a second chance. The day I turned 18, nobody brought me a cake. They brought me a cardboard box and a bus ticket. That was the system's version of a birthday present. For 2 years, since the state had officially declared me an orphan after my grandfather's disappearance, my world had been the beige, scuff-marked walls of the Northwood group home for boys. 2 years of scheduled meals, mandatory group therapy sessions that felt more like interrogations, and the constant low-grade hum of fluorescent lights that seemed to buzz right under your skin. My social worker, a woman named Carol, who always smelled faintly of peppermint and paperwork, sat across from me in the visitor's room, her smile as thin and brittle as a dried leaf. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said, pushing a manila envelope across the metal table. It landed with a soft, final thud. Inside was my birth certificate, my Social Security card, and $112 in cash, the last of the state's stipend. My freedom, in paper form. "So that's it?" I asked. My voice came out rough, like I hadn't used it in a while. In a way, I hadn't. Not for anything that mattered. "That's it," she confirmed, her tone professionally gentle. "You've aged out. You're an adult now. The world is yours." It felt like a joke. The world wasn't mine. I didn't even have a corner of it. The bus ticket was one way to the city's central shelter. The box was for the 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and 1 worn-out copy of a book my grandfather had given me years ago that I kept under my mattress. That was the sum total of my worldly possessions. Carol looked down at her clipboard, avoiding my eyes. It was a practiced move. I'd seen her do it 100 times with other boys. The moment of severance, the clean cut. It was easier for them if they didn't have to see the look in your eyes. "There is one other thing," she said, almost as an afterthought. She pulled a second envelope from her briefcase. This one was different. It was thick, creamy-colored paper, heavy and old-fashioned. My name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar script. This came to our office about a month ago, from a law firm. It was addressed to you, to be delivered on your 18th birthday. We weren't legally allowed to give it to you before today. I stared at it. A letter. For me. Nobody wrote me letters. In the system, you're a case file, not a correspondence. I took it from her. The paper felt strangely warm. There was no return address, just the embossed name of a firm. Albright and Finch, attorneys at law. "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know," Carol said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine curiosity crossed her face. "They were very specific about the instructions. We just held it for you. It's an inheritance, I believe." The word hung in the air between us, alien and absurd. Inheritance. It was a word for people in movies, for people with families and sprawling estates, and secrets whispered in libraries. It wasn't for kids like me, who measured their worth in the number of trash bags it took to move their life from one foster home to the next. Mine took one. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single, stiff sheet of paper and a tarnished, old-fashioned iron key. The letter was brief and formal. It stated that, upon the confirmed death of my grandfather, Arthur Vance, his sole property and remaining assets were to be transferred to his only living heir, Leo Vance, on the occasion of his 18th birthday. The property was listed as 114 Main Street, Havenwood. The key, it said, was for the front door. I read the words again. Confirmed death. The official term felt like a punch to the gut. For 2 years, he was just disappeared. A missing person. A ghost I kept waiting for. Now, he was a line of legal text. An asset transfer. "Where is Havenwood?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Carol frowned, tapping on her phone. "Never heard of it." A few seconds later, she looked up. "Looks like it's way upstate. A small town, very small. Barely a speck on the map." She looked at me, her professional mask slipping for a second. "Leo, listen. Don't get your hopes up. These things, sometimes it's just a piece of land with back taxes owed, or a house that's been condemned. It could be more trouble than it's worth." I knew she was trying to protect me, to manage my expectations the way they always did. Don't hope too much. Don't want too much. Don't feel too much. It's safer that way. But it was too late. Hope, terrifying and unfamiliar, had already slipped through the cracks. It felt like a shard of glass in my chest. I looked at the key in my palm. It was heavy, ornate, the kind of key that opened a door to something more than just a room. It was a key from a story. Maybe, for the first time, it was from my story. I looked at the one-way bus ticket to the shelter, then back at the letter. 2 paths. One led to a familiar kind of emptiness, a world I already knew how to survive. The other led to a place called Havenwood, a place my grandfather had left for me, the man who had raised me, who had taught me how to read and how to skip stones, and who had vanished one Tuesday morning without a word, leaving a hole in my life so big the entire system had poured into it. I folded the letter and put it and the key into my pocket. The metal was cold against my leg. "I'm not going to the shelter," I said. Carol opened her mouth to argue, to give me the standard lecture about practicality and safety nets. But she saw something in my eyes, I think. A flicker of a person she hadn't seen before. She just nodded slowly. "There's a bus that leaves from the North Terminal," she said softly. "It heads up that way. It'll take you most of the day." She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, tucking it into the front pocket of my worn hoodie. "For lunch," she said. "Good luck, Leo." An hour later, I was sitting on a bus, watching the gray city blur into the smudged greens and browns of the countryside. The cardboard box with my life inside was in the luggage hold below. The key was in my hand, my fingers wrapped so tightly around it that the teeth were pressing deep lines into my palm. I didn't know what I was going to find in Havenwood. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe it was just a pile of rotten wood and debt. But it was something. It was a place to go, and for the first time in 2 years, it felt like I was moving toward a future instead of just running from a past. It was a long ride, the kind of bus ride where you watch the world change, one tree, one field, one forgotten town at a time. The city's dense, angry energy slowly gave way to the quiet, sprawling loneliness of the countryside. I watched suburbs bleed into farmland, and farmland dissolve into dense, dark forests. The other passengers were a collection of ghosts, each lost in their own thoughts, their faces reflecting the passing landscape in the grimy windows. I didn't talk to anyone. I just held the key. It was my anchor. Every time a wave of doubt washed over me, the cold, familiar fear that this was all a mistake, that I was chasing a ghost story, I would feel its weight in my pocket. It was real. The letter was real. Havenwood was real. The bus driver announced the stop with a gravelly voice that sounded like it was dredged up from the bottom of a coffee pot. "Havenwood. Next stop, Havenwood." I looked out the window. There was nothing there, just a two-lane road flanked by dense woods and a sky that was turning a bruised purple with the coming evening. Then the trees thinned and a town appeared, looking less like a place people lived and more like a place that time had forgotten to erase. A handful of buildings lined a single main street, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a boarded-up general store, a gas station with antique pumps that looked like they belonged in a museum. And in the center of it all, a squat, solid building made of dark red brick, with tall, arched windows clouded over with years of dust. A faded sign hung above the door, the gold leaf letters peeling away. U.S. Post Office. The bus hissed to a stop in front of it. This was 114 Main Street. This was it. "This is you, kid," the driver said, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I was the only one getting off. I grabbed my backpack, which held the book from my grandfather and the envelope from the lawyer. With a groan of gears, its red taillights, with a groan of gears, its red taillights shrinking into the distance until they were gone, leaving me in an unnerving silence. The town was quiet, too quiet. No cars passed. No lights were on in the houses I could see. The only sound was the wind whistling through the eaves of the old buildings. I was alone. I stood there for a long moment on the cracked sidewalk, just looking at the post office. It was larger than I expected, a proud, stubborn building that seemed to be holding its ground against the encroaching forest and the slow decay of the town around it. The brick was streaked with grime, and the grand double doors were a faded, peeling blue. A thick, rusted chain was looped through the handles, held together by a massive padlock. My heart sank. A padlock. Of course. The key in my pocket suddenly felt useless, a cruel joke. Was this it? Was I supposed to stand on a sidewalk in the middle of nowhere, locked out of the one thing I had left? I walked up the 3 shallow steps, my boots echoing in the quiet. I pulled on the chain. It didn't budge. Frustration and a bitter, familiar despair began to well up inside me. I should have gone to the shelter. I should have taken the $112 and found a cheap room for a week. I should have known better than to believe in keys from stories. I was about to turn away, to slump down on the steps and figure out how to survive the night, when I saw it. A smaller, less obvious door tucked away in an alcove to the side of the main entrance. It was a simple wooden door, also painted blue, but it had a different kind of lock, an old iron keyhole, the exact shape and size of the key in my hand. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was shaking, partly from the cold, partly from a fear I couldn't name. The fear that it wouldn't work. Or worse, the fear that it would. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it was the wrong one. But then I pushed, a little harder, and it slid all the way in with a deep, grating click. I turned it. The mechanism inside was rusted and stubborn, groaning in protest after years of silence. With a final, loud clunk, the lock gave way. I took a deep breath, put my hand on the cold brass knob, and pushed the door open. The air that rushed out to meet me was thick and musty, a smell of sealed-off time, of dry paper and dust, and the faint, sweet scent of decay. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for a very long time. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me, its closing boom echoing through the vast, dark space, plunging me into near-total darkness. I was in. I stood just inside the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. The darkness was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled all sound. My eyes struggled to adjust, finding no purchase, no faint outline of a window or a crack of light. It was like being sealed in a tomb. I fumbled in my backpack for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. I switched on the flashlight, and the beam cut a sharp, narrow cone through the blackness, illuminating a universe of floating dust motes. I swept the light across the room. I was in what must have been the main lobby of the post office. The floor was a beautiful black and white checkerboard tile, now covered in a thick carpet of gray dust. A long, dark wood counter ran the length of the room, its polished surface dulled and grimy. Behind it, a wall of brass-doored P.O. boxes glinted in the light, their little windows like vacant, staring eyes. To my left, the tall, arched windows I'd seen from the outside were covered from top to bottom with heavy, floor-length drapes that blocked out any hint of the evening sky. Everything was perfectly preserved, as if the last person to leave had simply turned out the lights and walked away, expecting to be back in the morning. Except that morning had never come. The silence was immense. It pressed in on me, a physical weight. It was the silence of abandonment. I took a tentative step forward, my boot crunching on something. I pointed the light down. The floor was littered with scattered envelopes, old mail, dropped and forgotten. I picked one up. The postmark was faded, but I could just make it out. October 12th, 10 years ago. I swept the light further. On the counter, a perpetual calendar was frozen on the same date. A coffee mug sat beside it, a dark brown ring staining the bottom. Whatever happened here, it happened on a single day. The day the town's heart stopped beating. I walked behind the counter, my light dancing over sorting tables. Canvas mailbags slumped in corners like sleeping bodies, and stacks of official-looking forms yellowing with age. It was a museum of last moments. I felt like an intruder, a grave robber. This wasn't just an empty building. It was a place full of ghosts, of messages that never reached their destination. I found a door behind the sorting area and pushed it open. It led to a small back office. A heavy wooden desk sat in the center of the room, and behind it a large, comfortable-looking leather chair. This must have been the postmaster's office, my grandfather's office. The air in here was different, more personal. It smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a scent that struck me with a jolt of memory so sharp it almost buckled my knees. I remembered that smell. I remembered him, sitting in a worn armchair in our small apartment, reading to me, the air filled with that same comforting aroma. He was here. Desk sat a small, intricately carved wooden box. It wasn't locked. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single photograph. It was a picture of a much younger me, maybe 5 or 6 years old, sitting on my grandfather's shoulders. We were both grinning at the camera, the kind of pure, unthinking smiles you only have when you feel completely safe. I was holding a half-eaten ice cream cone, and he was looking up at me, his eyes full of a fierce, protective love that I had forgotten, or maybe had never truly understood. I sank into the dusty leather chair, the photo clutched in my hand. The chair sighed under my weight, a puff of dust rising around me. This was his chair. He sat here, in this room. He looked at this photo. And then, one day, he was gone. Why? Why would he leave me? The question I had been screaming into the void for 2 years echoed in the silent room. If he loved me, why would he abandon me? I put the photo down gently, and my fingers brushed against something else in the box. A small, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a P.O. box number, 313, and a 3-digit combination, 24-11-36. I looked up at the wall of brass boxes I'd seen in the lobby. One of them held an answer. I had to know. I left the office, my phone's beam cutting a path back into the main lobby. The wall of P.O. boxes seemed to hum with secrets. I ran the light over the numbers, searching. 101, 102, 215, 311, 312, 313. There it was. Just another small brass door among hundreds, indistinguishable from the rest. But this one was for me. I stood in front of it, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I reached out and touched the small combination dial. It was cold and stiff. I took a breath and began to turn it. Right to 24. The click of the tumblers was unnervingly loud in the silence. Left past 24 to 11. Another click. Right to 36. A final solid clunk. I pulled on the small latch. The little door swung open with a soft metallic sigh. Inside, there was no mail. There was just one thing, a thick, sealed envelope, just like the one I'd received from the lawyer. But this one had my name on it, written in my grandfather's familiar, elegant handwriting. I pulled it out. It was heavy, much heavier than a few sheets of paper. I turned it over. There was no seal on the back, just a single sentence written in the same ink. Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am so sorry. The words blurred as tears I hadn't realized I was holding back finally fell. I cried for the 5-year-old boy in the picture. I cried for the 16-year-old boy who had been told his only family had disappeared. And I cried for the 18-year-old man standing alone in the dark, holding a letter from a ghost. I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. The contents of the envelope felt heavy, dense. I tipped them out into my hand. It wasn't just a letter. First came a fixed stack of $100 bills, held together by a brittle rubber band. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Beneath the cash was the letter itself, several pages long, filled with my grandfather's script. And under the letter, something hard and metallic. A second key, smaller than the first and much simpler, like a key for a safe or a lockbox. Must have so many questions. I know you must have so many questions. I know you must be angry. You have every right to be. The story you were told, the story the world knows, is that I abandoned you. I need you to know, with all my heart, that it is a lie. Everything I did to protect you. I had to stop reading. I leaned against the wall of cold brass boxes and slid down to the floor, the dust puffing up around me. The money felt like a meaningless pile of paper in my lap. Protect me? How was leaving me to the mercy of the foster care system protecting me? How was letting me believe for 2 years that I was completely alone in the world an act of love? The bitterness was a familiar taste in my mouth. It was the armor I had worn for years. But as I sat there, in the silence of his post office, Another feeling began to seep through the cracks. Grief. A deep, profound grief for the man I had lost twice. Once to his disappearance, and now again to the confirmation of his death. I took a few ragged breaths, the dusty air catching in my throat, and I forced myself to keep reading. I owed him that much. I owed myself the truth. This town, Leo, the letter continued, Havenwood. It wasn't always like this. It was a good place, a proud place. People knew their neighbors. They helped each other. I was the postmaster here for 40 years. I knew every family, every secret, every joy, and every sorrow that passed through this building in a sealed envelope. This place was the town's heart, and I was its keeper. His words painted a picture of a world I couldn't imagine, a community, a home. But things changed. A company came to town, Apex Development. They started buying up land, quietly at first, a farm here, a business there. They made big promises, jobs, revitalization, a new future. Some people sold, happy for the money. But others, the ones who had been here for generations, refused. Our roots were too deep. Apex didn't like that. They started playing dirty. They found ways to put pressure on people. They'd buy up the debt on a family farm and call it in. They'd file frivolous lawsuits to drain a small business of its savings. They were patient, vultures. One by one, people were forced to sell. They broke the town's spirit. I could feel the anger in his handwriting, the pen strokes deeper and darker on this part of the page. I saw what was happening. As the postmaster, I saw the notices, the legal threats, the foreclosure warnings. I tried to warn people, to organize them. But we were outmatched. Apex had armies of lawyers and endless money. We had our pride, and that wasn't enough. Then I found something. A mistake they made. A piece of mail misdelivered. It was an internal memo from one Apex executive to another. It laid out their whole strategy. It wasn't just about acquiring land. It was about acquiring the water rights. There's a deep, clean aquifer under this valley, Leo, worth billions. The memo detailed their plan to use a legal loophole to declare the town economically non-viable, which would allow them to seize the remaining properties through eminent domain for pennies on the dollar. They weren't revitalizing Havenwood. They were planning to erase it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a story about a failed town. It was a story about a crime. I knew I had to expose them. I made copies. I gathered evidence. I documented everything I could find. But they found out. I don't know how. Maybe I was careless. Maybe someone talked. One night I got a visit. Not from a lawyer in a suit. From two men who didn't give their names. They made it very clear what would happen if I went to the press or the authorities. They wouldn't just come for me. They would come for you. The letter shook in my hands. I saw it then. A flash of a memory. A dark car parked across the street from our apartment. My grandfather, his face pale and grim, telling me to stay away from the windows. I had been a child. I hadn't understood. They knew you were my only weakness, Leo. My whole world. I was trapped. If I released the documents, I was putting a target on your back. If I did nothing, I was letting them steal the homes of everyone I cared about. I couldn't see a way to win, so I chose a third option. I chose to protect you and to save the evidence for a time when it could be used safely. That night, I packed a bag. I took the original documents and everything I had. I put this letter, the cash, and the key in your P.O. box. I set up the legal transfer of the property for your 18th birthday. It was the only thing I could think of to give you a place to stand, a place to start from. Then, I drove you to your mother's estranged sister's house, a woman you'd never met. I told you I was going on a trip and would be back soon. It was the hardest lie I ever told. I kissed you goodbye, and I walked away. I knew the state would intervene eventually, and you'd be placed in the system. It felt like a monstrous thing to do, but I believed it was the only way to make you disappear from their radar, to make you safe. I became a missing person, and you became an anonymous ward of the state. They couldn't connect us anymore. The money in this envelope is everything I had saved. It's not much, but it's enough to give you a choice. You can take it and walk away, disappear, build a new life for yourself somewhere far from here. No one would blame you. You don't owe this town or me anything. Forget Havenwood. Forget all of this. Be safe. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. But there is another choice. The second key in this envelope opens a safe deposit box at the county bank in the next town over. Inside that box is everything. The original Apex memo. All the evidence I collected. Enough to expose them for what they are. If you choose this path, it will be hard. They will fight you. They are powerful, and you are just one person. But this building, this post office, is legally yours. They can't force you out easily. This place is the last anchor of the old Havenwood. As long as it stands, their claim on the valley is not complete. The choice is yours, Leo. Freedom or a fight. I don't know which is right. I just know I love you. I have loved you every second of every day. Please, whatever you do, know that. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I finished the letter and let the pages fall into my lap. The silence of the post office rushed back in, but it was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of his voice, his love, his impossible choice. I wasn't an abandoned kid anymore. I was a protected one. I was the keeper of a promise. All the anger I had held on to for 2 years, all the bitterness, it didn't vanish, but it transformed. It settled into a cold, hard resolve in the pit of my stomach. I looked around the dark, dusty lobby. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was an arsenal. It was a headquarters. It was home. He had given me a choice: walk away and be safe, or stay and fight. For him. For the people of this town he loved. For the 5-year-old boy in the photograph. It wasn't a choice at all. It was never a choice. I picked up the money, the letter, and the small, simple key. I had work to do, but first I needed to sleep. I went back to the postmaster's office, to his chair. It was the only place in the world I wanted to be. I curled up in the worn leather, using my backpack as a pillow, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel alone. I felt like I had come home. And if you've ever been in a position where you had to make a choice that defined who you were going to be, I want you to let me know in the comments. This channel is about those moments, the ones that forge us. Your story matters here. I woke up to a world of gray light. Thin, watery sunlight was filtering through the grime on the tall, arched windows, casting long, dusty beams across the lobby floor. The post office looked different in the daylight, less like a tomb and more like a sleeping giant. The dust was still there, a soft blanket over everything, but I could see the beauty underneath it now. The rich, dark wood of the counter, the intricate metalwork on the P.O. box doors, the solid, dependable bones of the building itself. My first night of freedom had been spent on the floor of a ghost town's post office, and I felt more rested than I had in years. The cold had seeped into my bones, and my stomach was a hollow ache, but my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. The first step was practical. I needed food, and I needed information. I took $100 from the stack my grandfather had left me. The paper felt crisp and impossibly real in my hand, and tucked it into my pocket. I left the rest, along with his letter and the safe deposit box key, hidden safely back inside P.O. Box 313. I let myself out the side door, the click of the lock echoing in the morning quiet. The town was just as silent as it had been the night before, but the daylight made it seem less menacing, more melancholy. I could see the faded glory in the architecture of the other buildings on Main Street. A handsome brick storefront with Sinclair's Mercantile etched in the glass. A small, elegant building that must have been the town bank, its windows boarded up. These were the places my grandfather had written about. The business's apex development had bled dry. The only sign of life was the diner I'd noticed last night. The neon "Open" sign was off, but a thin curl of smoke was rising from a chimney on its roof. I walked towards it, my boots the only sound on the street. The diner was called The Haven. The windows were clean, and through them I could see a woman wiping down the counter. I pushed the door open, and a little bell tinkled, a cheerful, out-of-place sound. The woman looked up. She was probably in her late 60s, with a cloud of white hair and a face etched with the kind of fine lines that come from worrying and smiling in equal measure. She wore an apron over a simple dress. "Well now," she said, her voice warm but laced with surprise. "Haven't heard that bell in a while. What can I get for you, hun?" "Coffee?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. "And maybe some breakfast?" "Can do," she said, gesturing to the row of stools at the counter. "Sit yourself down. I'm Martha." "Leo," I said, sliding onto a red vinyl stool that creaked in protest. She poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and pushed it in front of me. It was black and strong and hot. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. "You're not from around here," she stated, not unkindly. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am," I said. "Just got into town last night." "On the evening bus," she nodded, as if that explained everything. "Haven't had anyone get off that bus in, must be 2 years now." She looked at me with open, honest curiosity. In the group home, you learned to hate that look. It was always followed by questions you didn't want to answer. But here, from her, it felt different. It felt human. "My grandfather, he used to be the postmaster here, Arthur Vance. He left me the building." Martha froze, the rag she was holding hovering over the counter. Her eyes, which had been warm and friendly, suddenly filled with a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Sadness, pity, and something else, something like awe. "Arthur's boy," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He left." "He passed away," I said. He left. "He passed away," I said, the words feeling strange and new on my tongue. "I just found out." A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry to hear that, child, truly. Your grandfather was a good man, the best of us. He held this town together for as long as he could." She turned away and busied herself at the grill, and soon the smell of bacon and eggs filled the small diner. She worked in silence for a few minutes before speaking again, her back still to me. "So you've come to claim the post office?" "I have," I said. "I'm going to be staying." She turned back, a plate heaped with food in her hands. She set it down in front of me. "Staying?" she asked, her voice cautious. "There's not much to stay for, Leo. The town's mostly empty now. Just me and old Mr. Henderson at the gas station, and a few families holding on up in the hills. Apex owns everything else. I know, I said, meeting her gaze. I know all about Apex. A spark of understanding lit up her eyes, a flicker of the old Havenwood fighting spirit my grandfather had written about. He told you, she said. Arthur. He found a way to tell you. I just nodded, my mouth full of the best eggs I'd ever tasted. We didn't say much more after that. I ate, and she refilled my coffee, and a quiet understanding passed between us. When I was finished, I pulled out the $100 bill. She looked at it and shook her head. No, hon, not today. Your money's no good here. Not for Arthur Vance's grandson. You eat here for free as long as you're here. It's the least we can do. I tried to insist, but she was firm. You're going to need that money for other things, she said, her expression turning serious. Like turning the power back on. And dealing with them. She gestured vaguely out the window, a look of deep-seated dislike on her face. Apex. They send a man around once a month in a shiny black car. He makes an offer on the last few properties. My diner, Henderson's station, the post office. He thinks he can wear us down. She looked me straight in the eye. Don't let him wear you down, Leo. I won't, I promised, and I meant it. I left the diner with a full stomach and a renewed sense of purpose. Martha had given me more than a free meal. She had given me a connection, a piece of the community my grandfather had died trying to protect. She had confirmed his story. She had shown me I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. My next stop was the county seat, a larger, more prosperous-looking town about 30 minutes down the road. I had to hitch a ride with a farmer in a rattling pickup truck who didn't say a word the whole way, which suited me just fine. I had two objectives, the bank and the law office of Albright and Finch. I went to the bank first. It was a sterile, modern place, all glass and steel, a world away from the dusty brick of Havenwood. I walked up to a teller who looked bored and handed her the safe deposit box key and a copy of the inheritance letter that named me as the beneficiary. I was terrified she would say no, that there would be some form I didn't have, some ID I couldn't provide. My entire life, I'd been told no by people behind desks. But the bored teller just typed my name into her computer, looked at the screen, and nodded. She led me into a vault with a heavy circular door that looked like it belonged in a movie. The air was cold and still. She used her key and my key to open a long, thin metal box. Then she left me alone in a small, private viewing room. My hands were sweating. This was it, the heart of the mystery, the reason for everything. I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of papers nearly 2 inches thick. On top was the original Apex memo, its corporate letterhead stark and official. I read the first few lines, and the casual, clinical cruelty of the language made me sick. They talked about Havenwood not as a community of people, but as a resource to be liquidated. They talked about the aquifer as the asset. Below the memo were dozens of other documents, copies of deeds, financial records showing shell corporations Apex had used to buy up debt, sworn, notarized affidavits from 2 former Apex employees who had quit in disgust, detailing the company's tactics of intimidation and harassment. My grandfather had built a fortress of paper. It was a meticulous, damning case against them. At the very bottom of the box was another envelope. This one contained a cashier's check made out to me for $25,000 and a short, handwritten note from him. "Leo," it said, "this is from the sale of our old apartment and everything in it. I couldn't risk putting it in the P.O. box. Use it for legal fees. Use it to fix the roof. Use it to live. It's a poor substitute for a life with you, but it's all I had left to give. Be brave. I love you." I folded the note and put it in my pocket, my own personal armor. I packed the documents into my backpack, which now felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It was the weight of responsibility. I walked out of the bank feeling like a different person. I wasn't just a kid who had inherited a building. I was a witness. I was the keeper of the truth. My final stop was the law office. Albright and Finch was located in a modest but respectable brick building. The name on the door sent a shiver through me. This was the first breadcrumb on the trail that had led me here. I was ushered into an office where a woman stood to greet me. She was in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm competence. "Mr. Vance," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm. "I'm Eleanor Albright. I was your grandfather's attorney. I've been waiting for you." She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't old and stuffy. She was direct, and she looked at me not as a child, but as a client. "Please, sit down." I sat, and she took the seat opposite me behind a large, uncluttered desk. "I'm assuming you received my letter and the key," she began. "And I'm assuming, since you're here, that you found what your grandfather left for you inside the post office." "I did," I said. "I found his letter, and I've just come from the bank." I unzipped my backpack and laid the stack of documents on her desk. She didn't look surprised. She simply nodded, a flicker of something, respect maybe, in her eyes. She picked up the top memo and scanned it. "I advised him against this course of action, you know," she said, her voice even. "I told him to go to the Attorney General, to go to the press. He had a strong case." "Why didn't he?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because of you," she said simply. "Apex made it clear that if he became a public problem, you would become a private one. They couldn't be touched legally for it, but he knew they would find a way to hurt you. He wouldn't risk it. So he created this time capsule, this plan. He entrusted me to be its executor." She leaned forward. "He also left very clear instructions for me in the event that you chose this path, the path of fighting back." "What were they?" "First, to represent you, pro bono. His estate paid my retainer in advance, years ago. Second, to file for an injunction against any further development or property seizure by Apex in the Havenwood Valley, using this evidence as the foundation. And third, to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "That Apex Development will not take this lying down. They have deep pockets and a ruthless legal team. They will try to bury you in motions and delays. They will try to discredit your grandfather, and they may try to intimidate you directly. This will not be an easy fight, Leo." "I know," I said, "but I'm not walking away." Eleanor Albright looked at me for a long, silent moment, her gaze searching. It was another test, another gatekeeper deciding if I was worthy. I met her eyes and didn't flinch. Finally, she gave a small, decisive nod. "Good," she said. "Then let's get to work." We spent the next 2 hours going over the documents, planning our strategy. She was brilliant, seeing angles and connections I had missed. For the first time, I felt like I had a powerful ally, that my grandfather's faith had been well placed. When I left her office, the sun was beginning to set. I had a clear plan. I had a lawyer. I had evidence. And I had $25,000 in my pocket. I hitched a ride back to Havenwood, the same silent farmer taking me home. When he dropped me off in front of the post office, the town was sinking back into its evening twilight. But it didn't feel lonely anymore. I saw a light on in the diner. Martha was there. I saw Mr. Henderson closing up his gas station for the night. And I saw the post office, my post office, standing tall and solid in the fading light. It was waiting for me. I used the key and let myself in. The smell of dust and old paper greeted me like a familiar friend. This was my place now, my battleground, my home. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The first thing I did was get the power and water turned on. The look on the utility worker's face when he saw the inside of the post office was a picture of disbelief. "Been 20 years since this place had juice," he muttered, shaking his head. The moment the lights flickered on, chasing the shadows out of the corners, it felt like the building took its first breath in a generation. I spent my days cleaning. I started in the small apartment upstairs that I hadn't even known was there. It was a simple 2-room flat, covered in the same thick layer of dust as everything else. But it was my space. I swept, I scrubbed, I opened the windows to let the fresh, cold air chase out the stale smell of time. I bought a mattress and a cheap hot plate with some of the money. It wasn't much, but it was the first home that was truly mine. While I worked, the legal battle began. Ms. Albright was true to her word. She filed the injunction, and the shockwaves were immediate. Apex Development's lawyers responded with a flood of paperwork, dismissing our claims as the frivolous actions of a disgruntled heir. They filed a motion to have the case thrown out. A man in a shiny black car did come to visit. He was wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in dusty Havenwood. He found me sweeping the front steps of the post office. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his smile oily and insincere. "My name is Mr. Corbin. I represent Apex Development." "I know who you are," I said, leaning on my broom. "I'm here to extend a generous offer on behalf of my clients," he said, ignoring my tone. "They're prepared to offer you $200,000 for this property. Cash. You could walk away from all this, start a new life." It was a lot of money, more than I could really comprehend. A year ago, I would have killed for a fraction of that. But it wasn't a year ago. "The property is not for sale," I said. His smile tightened. "Mr. Vance, perhaps you don't understand the situation. This town is dead. This building is worthless. You're sitting on a pile of bricks and memories. Take the money. It's the smart play." "I'm not interested in the smart play," I told him. "I'm interested in justice." He dropped the smile altogether. His face turned cold. "You're making a big mistake, kid. My clients have resources you can't possibly imagine. We will drag this out in court until that money your grandfather left you is dust. We will bury you." "Try it," I said. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. The threat hung in the air, but instead of fear, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Let them come. I wasn't the scared kid from the group home anymore. Word of the lawsuit spread through what was left of Havenwood. The Hills. The ones who've been fighting the Hills. The ones who've been fighting Apex for years on their own. They heard what Arthur's grandson is doing. People started to appear. An older man with hands gnarled from a lifetime of farming came to the post office one afternoon. He introduced himself as John Miller. His family had lost their farm to Apex 5 years ago. He handed me a box of old financial records. "Your granddad told me to hold on to these," he said. "Said they might be useful someday. I think this is the day." More followed. A woman whose family had owned the general store brought letters from Apex's lawyers, full of threats and intimidation. Little by little, my grandfather's fortress of paper grew stronger. They were bringing me the missing pieces, the human stories behind the legal documents. The post office was becoming a headquarters again, not for mail, but for a rebellion. We were putting the heart back into Havenwood, one memory, one piece of evidence at a time. The fight was far from over, but for the first time it felt like we had a chance. And every night I would sit in my grandfather's chair in his office, and I would feel his presence, his pride. I was finishing what he started. I was honoring his sacrifice. The choice he gave me, freedom or a fight, had turned out to be the same thing. My freedom was here, in this dusty old building, in this forgotten town, in this